Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so glad to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about how your elected officials communicate and how media coverage of what they're doing has seen a dramatic shift. Standing by is longtime Republican communications consultant Jeanette Hoffman. She's worked with candidates and on the issues across the state. We're going to talk about how elected officials have pivoted how they communicate in order to better reach their constituents. First, though, we're going to talk about how the media covers elected officials' statewide and local issues, the governor and legislators in Trenton as well. Joining me now are two very well-respected journalists who covered New Jersey for many years. Allison Gibson is a former newsroom manager who led a 24-hour news channel here in the state. And Frank Sapola spent 38 years as a radio and TV reporter and anchor around New York City. He is now the owner of guest placement company called Contacts Media based in Matawan, New Jersey. Welcome. It's good to see you both.
Good to see you, Laura. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, and Allison,
Hi, Laura.
Hey, Allison, full disclosure here. Allison hired me about 25 years ago as a State House reporter based in Trenton, and I was so overwhelmed at first, but thanks to your mentoring, I found my groove, and here we all are. So recently, I was back at the State House in Trenton, and there was a $300 million renovation. It's all complete, and I want to show you some of the video because so much has changed. A lot less access and a lot more locked doors. See, here in the video, this is the entrance to the governor's door, and I don't know if you remember, you used to be able to see in. You used to be able to walk right in. Now there's glass that's frosted, and the public can't see. Journalists have zero access. So bring you both back on. I mean, this looks like a physical barrier, having more locked doors inside the State House. So let's just talk a little bit about how media coverage of elected officials here in New Jersey and across the country, Allison, let's start with you, has kind of evolved over the past 20, 25 years.
Absolutely. And I think since we were talking about New Jersey and we're showing that frosted glass door, I also remember the time where it involved Governor Christie, and he invited the CNN cameras in to the Atlantic City Convention Center. Well, all of the rest of us, including his hometown station that had covered him for years, we were asked to please remain on the outside in the rain on the bleachers. I think that that's absolutely an example of how folks want to control the message. They want to use their preferred organizations of choice. And then they, as you've seen, corralled us, the media, put us behind barricades and are putting up their own barricades in order to prevent easy access. And so the only thing I can say about all of that and the frosted glass is you're working for a public. It's supposed to be the public whom you serve, and that requires transparency.
Yeah, Frank, let me get your thoughts on it. You've been a beat reporter, you've been out in the field, now you're working on the other side helping place guests. What kind of message is this sending to reporters?
Well, first of all, I concur with my former colleague, Allison Gibson. And by the way, she's in the book next to me right over here. Without Allison Gibson, there's no News 12 New Jersey. And I'm just honored to be on the same panel with her. But to answer your question, if I may flip it, we live in a dangerous world. I'm not forgiving the politicians for what they're doing. I'm just saying that we do live in a dangerous world now. The rhetoric is harsher. The threats are there every single day. They have to protect themselves. Gabrielle Giffords shot in the head while on a campaign stop in Arizona. Threats by email, by phone. The whole dynamic of being a politician has changed, and so has the civility. There is none anymore. So are they right in doing that? No. I do think, however, that they have to do that because we live in this type of world where it is dangerous for a politician. We're old enough to remember when there was decorum in the State House, there was decorum in Congress, where you called your colleague Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so from the great state of Utah. But all of that is gone now. It's just very harsh out there. And I don't agree with it 100%, but I understand it.
Allison, let me flip this back to you. In New Jersey, political coverage, that used to really drive a portion of the newscast, especially New Jersey. I mean, politics, it just touches every part of our life. And being stuck between New York and Philadelphia, it's hard to find coverage. Are you finding that to be the case, not just in New Jersey, but other places as well?
I think that what has happened is as newsrooms shrink whether they are television newsrooms or newspapers, the amount of coverage has shrunk accordingly because you don't have someone who maybe once upon a time was embedded with a particular politician, perhaps especially when they were running for office, and they were there for all of the meetings and all the meet and greets and all the events that went on in the campaign trail that entire day. I know that many times I've had to work with our reporters and our people to pick and choose. Okay, we can go to this event at 9 o'clock, or we'll go to this town hall, but we can't do the meet and greet and ribbon cutting at 11 a.m. Nor maybe should we. I do know the result of that is that maybe you're not seeing as many stories. Was the ribbon cutting something that was necessarily worthwhile to bring to the general public? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly you were still, as a journalist, working your contacts, and you were letting the candidates know you were there. So I think that a part of the problem has been, no, there are sometimes fewer stories because there are fewer people to cover them. And I also think, though, that there is an expectation now that they'll let members of their own campaigns hold up the camera and do the coverage, or they'll have somebody in the audience do it. And then they put it out on their own social media channels. But that's not an independent journalist. And so that's going to have a particular editorial cadence to it. And so I think there's a real danger there.
Yeah, and Frank, that's really difficult for, as a consumer of news, to be able to tell the difference. We who've been reporters, you can kind of tell, oh, that sounds like a press release more than it sounds like unbiased information. So can you just talk a little bit about how the rise of social media really affects media coverage and elected officials?
Well, everyone right now is a reporter. If you have an iPhone, you are a reporter. That's good in the fact that there's video now being seen that normally wouldn't be seen. It's bad in that these folks don't have the experience or the education to pull that off. You show up at a car crash, somebody mentions that 2 people have been injured, you just run with it, just get it out there without any corroboration on any part. But the thing I find most troubling, and I've seen it at press conferences of late, is that you have a lot of younger reporters. And as a businessman, I see this. A lot of folks don't want to spend a lot of money for a good reporter, so they'll get some journalism school graduates to come and cover an event or whatever the case may be. But now they're being dictated by the politicians. I can't tell you how many press conferences I've been to of late with a client or just out of curiosity, where they come out and say, we are going to say something and there will be no questions at the end of this press conference.
Right.
There might be no answers, but there certainly should be questions. And the first thing I do is when it's wrapped up, I ask a question. You can't dictate to the media, the news media, what you want. Otherwise, just send out a press release. Telling us not to ask questions, I think, is the worst part of it. And unfortunately, a lot of the younger reporters just nod their heads and walk away.
I was going to say, they're intimidated and they may not know. It's okay to still ask, because there's plenty of times when people are not available, but you still throw the microphone out. You still try to get the comment. If they comment, if they don't, that's up to them. But that added a valuable point. And Allison, one of the things you were talking about is, how there are fewer resources, yet we have this 24-hour news cycle that we have to fill, and you're doing it with fewer people. And, getting information correct, there's a lot of incorrect information going out there. And as somebody who has sat in an editorial position where you're approving scripts before they go out, you were very meticulous in making sure, let's confirm this. That quality control doesn't seem to be there.
Even in New Jersey with the 24-hour news cycle, at the time that I left, there were 11 and a half hours of live television news being reported out of News 12 New Jersey. And that's an awful lot for just a handful of editors to comb through. Let alone when you add to the amounts of live television that you're covering. It's a tremendous responsibility. Every good editor needs an editor, is sort of an old-fashioned saying, but sometimes there is a little bit of, okay, we've got to meet the next deadline, we've got to get this up live, where are you? And now there are a lot of one-man in television one-man bands, the backpack journalists who are just, going out there and broadcasting it, oftentimes without the controls. I think for the most part, as a whole, we're doing a great job with that. But here's where the important thing comes into play. You still need someone back at the home base helping put all of that into context.
Right.
All of those live reports and all of that aren't going to do you any good if you don't have someone, to Frank's point, experienced to help put all of that into context to remind folks, okay, this is what happened before, and this could be the outcome of today's event. So that's important.
Yeah, and Frank, what about the use of ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, and social media? How do you see that playing in, and it hurting the industry and hurting those relationships and those people who have that context, that have that experience to present something? How do you see that playing in, or is it?
Well, I think we're a couple of years from artificial intelligence writing the basic news stories, so we'll need fewer writers. I saw a story out of India just this week where they have recreated the image of an anchor reporting the news. It's not a person; it's a computer-generated image of an anchor, a female anchor in this case, and it was pretty darn good. So I think we're maybe 5 years as a business person. 5 years from having owners of television stations and networks saying, hey, why in the world are we running the risk of having to pay an anchor a ton of money, he or she getting in trouble, slipping and falling, sexual harassment lawsuit, not showing up for work, we have to renegotiate their contracts and so on and so forth. If we can just have someone in the image that we need to project the news in an AI fashion. I think that is coming, and I think as every person in this business knows, it's all about the bottom line. If I can do that cheaper and still get a good product out there, it can work. And one last thing, if my audience is primarily Asian or my audience is primarily African American, I could theoretically through AI create the perfect anchor and not have to go shopping around for that anchor, who will deliver the news every night on time, never flubbing, and doing a great job.
Ultimately, people do get very comfortable and familiar with the person who does deliver the news to them. So back to you, Allison. Is there a way for local media to rebuild, reconceive journalism to adapt to this changing world where there is more AI, where there is, so much changing on social media?
Sure. And that kind of, I'm reminded of the old Max Headroom days. I know those of you old enough,
Yes.
You'll know what I'm referring to.
Me too.
Some of the news organizations have already done so by being very, very transparent and letting folks, their readers, their subscribers, their viewers know we don't use AI to write our stories. These are real people, real journalists. I think that you can only go so far with AI, regardless of your audience's comfort level with it. You still need those boots on the ground journalists to be out there in the community that they serve, getting to know the people and the people getting to know them as a real live human being that they can connect with. You can't necessarily do that with AI, regardless of the inroads are being made with the technology. There are also some other ways that newsrooms are exploring and quite successfully to beef up their ranks with real folks and not rely on AI and the chat. And those may include nonprofit efforts. And going to the public and asking for their support, oftentimes now in financial ways, in order to put, again, more boots on the ground. You have to, I don't think it'll ever be a case where we just all turn it over to the robots. And again, you don't have, context or the nuance. And readers and viewers, they're smart. They're savvy enough. They'll know. They'll be able to figure it out.
Allison and Frank, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been talking about how much journalism has changed in our state and how there are so few reporters actually covering our elected officials. But have our elected officials changed in how they communicate with all of us? Joining me now is political communications expert Jeanette Hoffman. She is president of Marathon Public Affairs. Jeanette, it's good to see you.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back on your show, as always.
Oh, always love seeing you. So let's talk a little bit about, in the past, elected officials in government, when they communicated through media, they would get their message out directly by walking through Press Row, talking to people in person. Press Row in Trenton doesn't exist anymore. So much has changed. So can you talk a little bit about, from the elected officials' perspective, is it more difficult for them to tell people what they're working on, considering there's a lot of competition for the attention?
Well, yes and no, Laura. I mean, listen, you and I go way back. We've been working in politics and communications since we were practically babies in the state house. And there, as you said, there was a physical press row. So, I was press secretary to a lot of politicians, and I would take my press release and I would walk up the stairs and I would give my press release to reporters like you and others and talk about why this issue was so important for the elected official I was representing. And I can't do that anymore, and neither can these elected officials, right? There's only, a couple different reporters covering state government and politics and the legislature especially, really not too many reporters covering the legislature. So they really have to be sure they're being sophisticated in how they get their message out. Not every bill that they write is going to get an article about it. Not every legislation that gets signed into law is going to even have a story about it. But, one of the good things that's happened, and it's a blessing and a curse, technology, is that they can communicate easier directly to the people through social media channels. And I say it's a blessing and a curse because the majority of people these days, they get their news from social media outlets like Twitter. That's great because it's accessible. And as I say, politicians and elected officials can communicate directly to voters. But, it's also not so good because there's just a lot of misinformation out there on social media. So you really have to, make sure what you're reading, fact check it yourself and make sure it's accurate.
Right, and it puts a lot of work on the consumer. And you touched on something about how you would walk through Press Row, which there was a physical aisle in the State House, and those relationships. I mean, a lot of stories I may not have been necessarily interested in, but because you and I had a relationship, or I had a good relationship with a certain individual from a press office, I would give it a second. I would give it a second. Okay, you know what? Yeah, we can do something on that. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of those connections that you make with the media?
Absolutely. It is, politics is about people, and communications is about building relationships with reporters. And, sometimes a lot of this legislation that legislators and governors work on, it's complicated, Laura. You read something, a couple of paragraphs, and you're like, this sounds boring. I don't want to talk about this. But if you have someone like me who, listen, I've known Jeanette for years, and I can break this down to you and say, Laura, this is important because this is going to impact property taxes, or this is going to impact day-to-day school operations, and kids in grades K through 5 are going to be impacted by this. Even though it's a little complicated, I can break it down for you. It's having those day-to-day relationships with people and reporters. It's really important because a lot of the stuff that happens in the legislature and in the governor's office, it's complicated, right? I mean, we kind of need people to break it down. And if you have relationships with reporters, it's easier to do that. And, what I hear with the absence of a lot of reporters covering legislation, that things get done in the dark and there's not a lot of transparency. And we've kind of seen that in the past couple of years ago with the gutting of the Election Law Enforcement Commission. And that's, the body that regulates election law. It's kind of been gutted. No one's really talking about it. No one's really, reporters, 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, they would have been all over that. That would have been the front page of every newspaper. No one reads newspapers these days. So in a way, it's troubling because lawmakers are allowed to get away with some things that they probably wouldn't have had if there was a more aggressive press corps.
Yeah, very interesting point. And there have been people who have been elected to office who turns out they lied to even get elected, and people are saying, well, how did this happen? Well, there aren't reporters actually covering it, and reporters who know how to push back and hold people accountable. That definitely, you can really see that. And, you mentioned about elect laws. There's a story that I've been covering quite a bit is the judicial crisis in the state of New Jersey. We've got 50 to 70 vacancies. How is that not getting more play? I can't understand it. It almost feels like that should be illegal, what's happening. And nobody but me is covering it? Or fewer people are covering it?
And I mean, that is a tragedy. That's impacting people's day-to-day lives. There's, divorces that are hanging in limbo. There's kids and, child support that's not getting paid. There's, kinds of things that are happening to children and families out there because there's a judicial crisis. And you are one of the only people in the state that's covering this. I don't, the legislature, that's their job to appoint judges, the governor's job to appoint judges, but it's the legislature's job to sign off on it in the Judiciary Committee, and it's just not being done. So, I'm not sure, why people aren't screaming on the top of their lungs about this. I know, you've had on Geraldine Lawrence from the New Jersey State Bar Association. She's a family court attorney. She's been screaming about this, but it's just, largely gone unnoticed. And I think, again, we talk about, the aggressive press corps that we had a decade ago. I don't think this would have happened in that time. So unfortunately, with, the dying down of the New Jersey media, there's some unfortunate consequences that come with that.
Well, I think it's also interesting that there are social media reporters who are just reporting on what people are posting, which I find fascinating. It's a whole new genre of reporting. I'm looking through headlines. I'm like, they're just reporting on social media. What's your take on that?
Yeah, they're like aggregating social media and reporting on people, or aggregating on TV shows, or it's a new genre of reporting because that's where stories can be found now. Someone. And it even goes back to President Trump. I think he kind of started that trend. It's like, what is he going to tweet today, right?
Right.
And
that's true.
That became the story. The tweet heard around the world. So he kind of revolutionized the way politicians use Twitter, because he kind of cut out the media and said, I'm just going to talk directly to my trillion Twitter followers or whatever it is. But now he's on Truth Social, so that's another story.
I mean, I imagine there's like a whole office of, just information technology within, especially, in the legislature, we've got re-elections coming up, midterm, all the legislatures up, they can use social media to really kind of position themselves and boost and get it out there. So they've got to have people who are very savvy on the social media end of it to ensure that they can get their message out and we win re-election.
Yeah, savvy and creative. I've seen some really creative things on social media, and the Assembly Republicans just did a video. These are a few of my favorite things, from the Sound of Music.
From the Sound of Music, yes.
Things. Yes, yeah, and it was really cute. And it had, talking about the budget and the ways that the Democrats and Governor Murphy have spent taxpayer money. And it was really, I thought it was really clever and a great use of technology and social media. And so, those are the kind of things that can go viral. And then reporters will write stories about that. And, people talk about it. And it's, look, it's very inexpensive. It didn't cost a lot of money. It's just, your own creativity and imagination. So I think, there's a lot of, there are people that's their job, is just to do social media for political campaigns. And, people are spending less money on TV ads and more money on digital ads and social media these days, because let's face it, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia TV, it's very expensive.
I was just going to say, in New Jersey, social media can really work to the advantage of some candidates, because if you want to buy into New York, if you want to buy into Philadelphia, those commercials are extraordinarily expensive. The production costs are expensive. And then the question is, who's watching it? Who's watching it? Is your target audience really watching it? Maybe the people watching TV, they've already made up their minds. And if you want to get into the younger vote, social media might be the way to go, not buying into TV.
Right, and you can target it. You can target things on social media to certain demographics or your certain legislative district. Listen, if you're in a legislative district in, my area in Monmouth County, you're not spending money on, New York TV that covers the whole, New York metro area, because that's a waste of money. You want to be targeted into your county. So you can do that on digital media. You can do that on social media, and it's very cost effective. And it's kind of the way campaigns, evolved in our state, and I think around the whole country.
Yeah. So if you were advising a client, what kind of things would you tell them to do? You mentioned about how the New Jersey Republicans came out with something that was kind of clever and funny. Sometimes you have to be careful with funny. What you think is funny may not be other people. So, how would you advise them to approach social media? So getting their message out through social media and trying to connect with people.
I think be strategic, be creative. And the thing about social media is it is social. You want to engage with your followers. You don't want to just be a voice out into, the echo there. You want to talk to people. You want to, if someone tweets back at you, tweet back at them. but be respectful. Always be respectful, Laura. I mean, I think I can't stress that enough because there's so much garbage on social media right now. It feels, sometimes it can be very dark and depressing on Twitter. So I think any candidate needs to be respectful because those tweets, those posts on Facebook, they last forever. Whether you delete them or not, people screenshot them and they can come back to haunt you. So always be respectful, be creative, be strategic.
Even myself, sometimes when I see a member of Congress commenting on something that I've posted, I'm like, oh wow, someone's paying attention, and it kind of makes you feel good. It kind of, gives you that oh wow, okay, somebody's paying attention. And that's probably a pretty cool thing for people, who may not have the same kind of access you and I have to those elected officials.
Yeah, and listen, it's just another form of constituent services. Some of the best members of Congress in New Jersey are the ones that have that personal touch, and it's about relationships. Politics is about people, as I said before. So, that personal touch, you might never meet your member of Congress, but they might comment on your Facebook page, and that makes you feel pretty good. Like, wow, they know me. They're talking to me. They care. So a little bit can go a long way.
Which goes back to the relationships. It's all about relationships. Jeanette Hoffman, Marathon Public Affairs, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's good to see you.
It's always great to be with you. Thanks, Laura.
And we thank you for watching New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.